Others might understand you by and by. Just move on up toward your destination.
Who are we? We are the ones who step up for each other. I've got your back. You've got mine. Kindness, humility, empathy. It's not just talk. It's who we are. It's who we always have been. And no one can take that from us. The movement to bring it back, it started here. And here. And here. In school gymnasiums, community centers, the living room down the block. You'll be where? Okay, we'll be there. Who are we? We're the movement that will beat Donald Trump. Welcome. We're going to have to sweat for it. We're going to have to sacrifice and fight. We're going to have to lead. Everyone is going to have to lead with kindness, humility, empathy, and not just talk, but action. Action today, action tomorrow. Action until we win. And we will win if we do this together. It's who we are. It's who we always have been. Now let's show them.
Welcome to this Biden-Harris campaign event. Mobilize Main Street, Black entrepreneurs and small businesses. Please welcome National Business Advisor, Rhett Buttle.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We are so thrilled to be able to be with you all tonight to have a conversation about something that is so critically important. As many of you know, our country has been devastated by COVID-19, and the Trump administration and President Trump in particular have not handled this well. And their mismanagement has led to far too many businesses being impacted, and quite frankly, too many business owners of color and too many Black businesses. Tonight, we wanted to have an important conversation about how we build back our economy better with Vice President Biden and Senator Harris at the helm. We have an amazing panel of experts, but then we not only want to have a conversation about the importance of policy and the importance of the private sector, but we want to start a training to get business owners engaged. We only have a few weeks left in this election. We're down to a few days, and every vote is going to be critical to bringing us to the election line. And you as small business owners, your community leaders, your friends, your neighbors, your employees, they listen to what you have to say. And so tonight, in addition to talking about policy, we want to equip you with the tools that you can to be the most effective messenger for the Biden-Harris ticket. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. And with that, it's my pleasure to turn the conversation over to my dear friend and colleague, Trey Baker, who is our Director of African American Engagement. Trey, over to you.
Thanks so much, Rhett, and thank you for all you're doing for small business and small business engagement in this country. It's truly an honor to be here tonight because in this campaign and in the African American program, on Mondays we talk Black-owned business with our flagship program, Make It Happen Monday, which we just got done with. It's very interesting to have the dynamic that we've had tonight, where we just got through talking to young entrepreneurs who are HBCU grads in celebration of HBCU week. And then we turn from that dynamic over to these wonderful business leaders who are leading organizations, leading their own businesses, leading government organizations that are so key to making the things that these young entrepreneurs need to happen. And so tonight is a wonderful night for the African American Engagement Program, the Small Business Program here, because it's the culmination of so much of the work that the Biden-Harris campaign has been doing this entire time. We recognize that COVID-19 has ravaged our community, ravaged our business community, and that up to 40% of Black-owned businesses will not survive this pandemic. And so the Biden-Harris campaign has been putting forth solutions on how to help and how to combat post-COVID-19. And so I'm just excited to continue this discussion that we start with Make It Happen Monday and we get to Mobilize Main Street. So with no further ado, I would like to turn you over to a person who's become a great friend and colleague and has been a great advisor to the African American Engagement Program, Mr. Christopher Upperman.
Trey, really do appreciate it. It's a pleasure to work alongside you in getting out this message, this critical message right now. First off, really, get Joe Biden and Kamala Harris elected. That is really what we're here for. We've been able to do that in a unique way by engaging the small business community, particularly the Black business community. But honestly, we have one singular thing in mind, which is folks need to get out and vote. So beyond all of what we've been doing over the course of the last number of months, that is the critical thing, is that we need folks to get out there. So if not for nothing, if you don't leave with anything, that's the thing, get out and vote. And we really appreciate it. Look, I have the pleasure tonight to have a roundtable conversation. My name is Chris Upperman. I'm one of the advisors on the Biden for Business team. I'm working closely with Rhett Buttle, Jana, and a number of other folks who are doing some amazing work to support the small business ecosystem. And I have the unique privilege tonight of having a good conversation with some dear friends and former colleagues of mine, people who are doing some amazing things, as Trey mentioned. We have the former SBA Deputy Administrator, Marie Johns, who is joining us for this conversation. We have Ron Busby, Sr. of the U.S. Black Chambers Incorporated, a real titan leader in this space. We have David Clooney of the Black Economic Alliance, particularly representing the Black Economic Alliance PAC this evening. And we have Carolyn Pitt, the founder of Film Connects out of Atlanta, Georgia. So once again, a really, really great conversation. And before I dive in with this conversation, because I want to give time for Marie to come on and for us to kind of get settled into this conversation, I just want to say one thing. There are a lot of narratives that are out here right now. We have some very specific celebrities in the last number of days who've been trying to make some real trouble on this kind of electorate front. And the reality is Trump's failed Black America. He's made a lot of promises to Black America, and the reality is that he's fallen really short of that. There's the healthcare side of things. There is this COVID response. We have Black businesses that have been closing at a rapid clip. 40% of businesses that are closed, and even more that are slated to never open again. So the reality is that that isn't the option, right? The option is Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, in my perspective. So with that, I want to actually dive into this conversation and start it off. We have Marie here, who is a leader, and she's led policy at the highest level, and is a fierce advocate and a small business owner herself. So Marie, thank you again for coming this evening and being on this conversation. When you think about our community, the Black community, talk to us about how important small businesses are to our local community, where we all reside. And what value do small businesses create for the families that reside in that community?
Well, Chris, I want to start by saying thank you for the privilege of being part of this august panel. And you said it, how this administration has really done in the Black community. We have been in a sunken place with this administration. I know we all saw the movie, so you know what I'm talking about. The Trump presidency has been devastating to Black businesses and to Black America in general. When you look at, for example, the PPP loans and the shameful way, and I don't so much fault the government professionals who labored hard to get that program up, but the policies were poorly written, and there was a lot of dog whistling going on to the big boys to get in there first, get the money, you're first at the trough, because from the White House, there never was any strong conviction to make that money available, that lifeline available to struggling small businesses. And as you mentioned, Chris, we had the great honor of working for President Obama and Vice President Biden at the SBA. And one thing you and I both know is that that administration was struggling with the economy was struggling when the Obama-Biden administration came into office. And the difference in the leadership couldn't be more stark. We had the Recovery Act. How we at the SBA worked hard to stand up the Small Business Jobs Act of 2010, which is one of the most comprehensive pieces of legislation specifically for small businesses that had been passed in decades. And that was largely due to direction and leadership from the White House, that we had to get support to our businesses, and we did a number of innovative things that today continue to reap benefits for small businesses. There's no way I'm going to try to talk a lot of statistics, because you've got the master of the walking encyclopedia of Black businesses on this panel, Ron Busby, and he will cover all that with his usual eloquence. But I just want to say very briefly a little bit about my personal story. Some of you may have heard this before, but it's such a part of my DNA that I have to share it often, and that is about my grandfather, my paternal grandfather, Justice Collins, who was a small business owner. He had a small landscaping company, started mowing grass for white families, wealthier white families in my hometown of Indianapolis. And from that lawn care business, he grew to be a landscaping company that he was one of the first Black business owners who was able to be bonded. And he was one of the first Black business owners in segregated Indiana at the time to win state contracts. And so that story is part of my history. My grandfather's courage as a small business owner, he created jobs for people, particularly men in the community, who probably couldn't have worked had it not been for my grandfather's business. He put our family from our very humble beginnings on a path to middle class in this country. And my grandfather's story is not unique. Probably so many of us have a family member in our story who has done something very similar. And so the power, the importance, just the dynamism and the very their worth in the very fabric of our country of small businesses, and particularly Black-owned small businesses in our communities, cannot be overstated. And that's why we need a Biden-Harris administration that's going to honor those businesses and give them the support that they need to continue to grow or to start again and grow in our communities across the country.
You couldn't have said it better. I mean, there were so many gems in everything that you just said. And I want to go in a lot of different ways. And I'll say very particularly, Ron, it's interesting that Marie had just mentioned the idea of wealth creation and wealth generation, right? And this is a very important aspect of why we start businesses, right? It's the American dream. This is what we all want to do, be a business owner. So look, you're an advocate, Ron, particularly for Black-owned businesses, a fierce one at that. I got to say, I've respected you many, many years for that, and particularly working with Marie and myself during the Council on Underserved Communities and any other moments during that time. But in your opinion, what does the government need to do better to help create wealth for Black businesses? In particular, what do you believe a Joe Biden and a Kamala Harris administration can do to further that?
Well, thank you, Chris, for the opportunity to be here, and for the rest of the panelists as well. I know we all have our unique stories as well as talking points in reference to this campaign season. I want to start off by addressing the video that we saw in the very beginning, and that is who we are. And so often when you hear business, you think Republican. And when you hear Black, you think Democrat. I'm the president of the U.S. Black Chamber. We are about Black-owned businesses. We don't say one party is better. We think people are what the solution needs to be. And this administration is all about intentionality. And so the government can do a great number of things to move our economy forward in reference to Black-owned businesses. And the first one is really about transparency. And I was so pleased to hear that the Biden-Harris team talked about government contracts. Right now today, and Marie knows this wholeheartedly, we cannot tell you what the government is spending with Black firms. The biggest procurer in America, and we can't tell you how much of it is represented from Black firms. That's got to be addressed first and foremost. There needs to be transparency, and this administration, the Biden administration, can definitely address that. Secondly, in reference to the one or two agencies that we do have with the SBA, and I know Marie did extremely well there. And one of the programs that many Black firms were able to create some wealth in our communities was through the 8A program. I'm a graduate of the 8A program, and I know how it can change lives, change businesses, and really change communities. But really the 9-year run rate is not long enough. And so I was extremely pleased to see that Biden heard what the U.S. Black Chamber said and actually has implemented, or at least designed it in its new program. If we could change that for Black businesses specifically from a 9-year period of time to more like a 15 or 20-year period of time, it would give that Black business the opportunity to really create generational wealth. If I have to start a business and then in 5 years, I got to start looking at transitioning that business out, I've never really had the opportunity to grow my firm. The next piece is, if I really have the opportunity to have a government contract, which is unique in itself, there is no way that I want to get a contract on January 1st and not get paid until June 15th. Under the previous administration, the Obama team did something that I thought was unique. It was transitional, and it could happen really simply. Even under this administration, we came to this administration, to Donald Trump, early on during the payroll protection plan and said, look, there's one thing that you can do, and you can pay your vendors on time. You can pay government contractors within the 15-day period that they need to be able to have cash flow. Instead, you are now forcing Black businesses to go get high interest rate loans where we know we pay twice the rate as our white peers just to carry the float of the federal government. That can be, should be, and has got to be changed immediately within the first 100 days. The other agency, the only agency that has the word minority in it, is the Minority Business Development Agency. We advocated for them to get the extra $10 million out of this program, which is still a drop in the bucket. That agency needs to be codified, it needs to be fully funded, and there needs to be accountability for them as well. The other one is, we need to sit at the table so that we're not always having these conversations after the fact. There's no way that legislation that was as big as this, 700 plus pages, and the words Black or African American never listed. And we have that many Black-owned businesses that we never had an opportunity to even have a conversation or a discussion about how it was going to impact us. Early on, the U.S. Black Chamber was saying, we're going to lose between 35 and 40% of our businesses, and no one wanted to act upon it. It wasn't until the Federal Reserve came out and said, guess what? We lost 41% of Black-owned businesses. That was after the fact. You've got to have someone at the table when these conversations are being had that really has an intentionality about making sure that Black businesses have what they need. And the last thing, there's going to be a lot of talk about infrastructure. We always talk about infrastructure during campaigns. What I want to see in the infrastructure bill first is that it happens in our communities. Our communities were impacted more so than anyone else. So the impact for the infrastructure opportunities should happen in our communities. And on top of that, they should happen with Black-owned businesses. If you really want to make sure that you have long-term sustainability in our communities, make sure that those Black-owned businesses have what they need: access to capital, access to good policy, and access to really good contracting opportunities, and someone there to make sure that that conversation doesn't die off after this Black Lives moment has died off.
You know, here again, folks, this is exactly why I brought these individuals to this conversation, because I mean, fierce advocacy and perspective. I mean, the reality is there's a lot of conjecture, there's a lot of conversations that's going on out here, but here's some real facts that we're sharing with you. And we really feel strongly that this upcoming administration, we're already kind of claiming that we'll do these things and implement these things. So Ron, we really do appreciate that. But it kind of follows. I mean, I'm really enjoying how, you know, from Marie to Ron and to now to Carolyn, the conversation seems to be flowing, because Ron, you spent time talking about banking and you talk about the financial institutions. And Marie, you mentioned about the PPP loans, which obviously were facilitated through the SBA, but through the financial institutions, the large ones at that. So Carolyn, you know, our banking system is critical to our financial marketplace, and some would even say it's central to shoring up our economy. What roles, in your opinion, do banks play in this? Like, what responsibility do they have? And in particular to you, you know, is there a specific institution that you've worked with that you feel has done a great job, or just anything along that line? I mean, I think it would be helpful for folks to know, because, you know, everyone had a lot to say about the PPP. It was largely a failure in terms of the way that it was implemented. But at the same time, there are ways in which you can find capital out here. So please share a little bit with us on your side.
Yeah, thanks again for the opportunity to be here this evening and with all of you this evening. You're right. Banks play an absolutely critical role. Access to capital, that's the petrol that we need to have our business go. And as we all know on this panel, access is not the same across the board. As we know, for Black female-owned businesses, 0.0006% of venture capital is flowing into those companies. And a total of 3% overall of capital from Silicon Valley goes into Black, brown, and female-owned businesses. So mainstream America is actually accessing the lion's share of capital. So what's interesting is while we know that banks are critical, we also know that there's more that they can do, particularly during what we are experiencing now in COVID. So we've got, the triple experience of economic downturn, healthcare crisis, along with, drastic unemployment that is unlike anything we've ever seen. And banks play the role in being able to facilitate those PPP loans and the EIDL loans and access that was available, and also to make sure that those are being distributed equitably. So as has been said earlier, that wasn't the case. So it depended very much on the size of the company, the relationship that they had with their bank, the size of the bank, in terms of whether or not individual business owners were successful. And up to 90% of Black and brown banks, we now know, were not successful in attaining these very critical stimulus dollars. All is not lost. I will share that within the entrepreneurial community, one of the organizations that surfaced pretty early on and consistently throughout that we heard about was Blue Vine, which is a fintech that tends to work with smaller and mid-sized businesses. And it really streamlined the process, was very interactive with applicants, and was really able to help them to access the capital that they needed to stay open. I'll also mention as well that partnerships are really critical. And we have an opportunity with the new administration that will take effect to make sure that public and private partnerships can step in, where Silicon Valley alone has not taken the time and the effort to support Black and brown businesses and female-owned businesses as well. One example of a public-private partnership is Harbor Bank, which is a Black-owned bank in Maryland that has partnered with Maryland's investment arm called TEDCO. And together what they've done is they've got a pilot that really is infusing pre-seed capital into Black-owned businesses that need it. It is fostering innovation, providing broad access and resources and much needed capital. And so it stands as a beacon and an example of what other states and even the federal government can do if we bring to bear partnerships with private and public organizations to make sure that that critical capital is accessed by Black and brown business owners.
Yeah, no, and it's a real good point that you actually make, this notion of public-private partnerships and working with outside entities that may be a little bit more flexible and nimble in the way that they can actually implement programs and are on the ground. They have the ability to know what is sometimes the effective way to deploy capital, to deploy programming, and what types of initiatives that will actually really be critical and useful. To that end, very particularly, David, you represent the Black Economic Alliance and this idea of collaboration. The BEA PAC made an endorsement for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. So, first talk to us about that, but share with us where you think the business community, private finance and banking and government can all work together with each other.
Yeah, so thank you so much for having me, Chris. And it really is an honor to be on this panel with my esteemed colleagues. And the Black Economic Alliance was started out of a recognition, was started after the 2016 election out of a recognition that Black folks, the status quo was not good enough for Black folks, particularly in terms of economic outcomes. And a group of Black business leaders came together and said, we have to be able to use our collective power, dollars, expertise, networks, and so forth to drive better outcomes, both from a public policy perspective, but also in engagement with the private sector. And one of the things, one of the mechanisms was endorsing and putting in place candidates who will better represent our interest and working with them and holding them accountable while they're in office to make sure that we're elevating the conversation around what it means not only to the Black community, but to the entire US economy for Black folks to do better. So to put that in context a little bit, McKinsey and Company put out a report in 2019 that showed if you were to close the Black-white wealth gap, you could add between 4 to 6% to US real GDP by 2028. Citi, the bank, just put out a report a few weeks ago showing that the US economy has lost out on $16 trillion of growth, 16 trillion with a T, $800 billion a year over the last 20 years as a result of racial inequity. and racial inequality. And so many of those reasons, lack of access to capital, lack of generational wealth have been discussed already. So the Black Economic Alliance has been talking to every candidate who would speak with us throughout the duration of this process. We had a presidential candidates forum in South Carolina back in 2019. I've been talking with every candidate again throughout the year, and we've been extremely encouraged by our increased engagement with the Biden-Harris ticket, even before Kamala Harris came on, working with folks like Trey Baker and others who understand the needs of this community and also have been very receptive in taking input and insight from the Black Economic Alliance and other organizations like some of the folks represented on this panel tonight. And I'm happy to say we were part of putting together things like the Racial Equity Plan. That's one of the pillars of the Build Back Better plan. And we're very encouraged by some of the things that the Biden-Harris team and campaign has championed, like supporting small businesses, increasing access to capital, increasing public-private partnerships. And I'll say, you asked about what are some folks in the public and private sector doing better or doing well. Let me start by saying, just like the Black Economic Alliance realized that the status quo was not good enough, I think 2020 has been a stark just example, and the PPP program is just one example of how the status quo, we've been accepting the status quo for far too long. And I think there's a better appreciation for the scope of the problem. And there's a recognition that we need an all hands on deck approach from the private, public, and nonprofit sectors to really attack it. So I think some of the things that businesses and even government are doing better, but I would really tout the private sector on this. So starting to look inward about the unique ways that they can support Black businesses, things like capital, technical assistance, supplier diversity, opening their networks, and how they can really scale what they're able to do in terms of impact on the Black community from a wealth building perspective and otherwise, and just creating opportunities for Black businesses by collaborating with folks in the private sector and the nonprofit sector. So that's something that we are very committed to doing, hopefully after November 3rd, after there is a new president-elect, and then into the new administration. So we look forward to continuing that conversation and going into detail about how we can build wealth for Black folks and how big of a driver supporting Black businesses is. As we know, two of the largest drivers of wealth in America have been home ownership and entrepreneurship, and there have been structural barriers erected for Black folk that have stood in the way of Black folks having, I wouldn't even call it equal access, any access to those opportunities. And as we've talked about again this year, we're just starting to begin to remove some of them, but the Biden-Harris team is going to have a lot of work to do, and we look forward to working very closely as we figure out how to do that at scale.
No, and it's a good point that you raise, because in this moment, really what it's taking is real leadership, which we see is missing, honestly, in this. And this is actually, in my opinion, what's really hopeful and something that I'm looking forward to in a potential Biden and Kamala Harris administration. Marie, we've been talking about this, and I know we brought it up. COVID-19 is just unprecedented. It's had an outsized impact on the Black community. I really think back to the Obama years, in particular under your leadership, was when the Jobs Act had to be enacted because the government, our economy was just hemorrhaging jobs, and there needed to be programs by the federal government. And we're seeing how critical federal government is to our way of life. So, when you think about COVID-19 in this moment, you think about the juxtaposition of the Jobs Act in that moment and kind of trying to triage, if you will, the hemorrhaging of jobs. Talk to us a little bit about the importance of kind of the federal government being thoughtful in programs and the initiatives and legislation in particular for moments like this. I believe you're on mute.
That all the time. I'm sorry. I want to pick up on a thread that David put out so well, and that's this notion of intentionality. What words emanate from the White House matter. They send signals. They give cues. They set the tone and the direction for what happens throughout. And so you mentioned COVID-19. It's been devastating. in Washington, D.C. alone, 75% of the deaths from COVID-19 have been Black people. And yet we have a White House that says, masks are for sissies, basically. I mean, saying that you're weak if you wear a mask. I mean, the ignorance of that is just chilling, quite frankly. But what we look forward to in a Biden-Harris administration is leadership that speaks life and speaks health and speaks inclusion. Everybody is going to matter. And it's not that it's going to be easy, because the government is going to, in many cases, have to be reconstructed under a new administration. But I firmly believe that we have the component parts. Carolyn talked about access to capital, huge issue for Black businesses. We all understand that. But what we have to do, and we went part of the way in the work that we did, Chris, but there's so much more we can do in involving non-traditional financial institutions in providing access to capital. I know Harbor Bank, great institution. TEDCO has just, there's new leadership at TEDCO, a dear friend of mine, Troy Stovall. I know he's going to do excellent work. I have the honor of chairing the board for a community bank in Washington, City First Bank. I believe in community banks, CDFI institutions. They make a difference. We don't have to always go to the big banks, because we saw in the PPP, in the administration of that program, many large banks. I had friends calling me. They were customers of large bank X, could not get an audience. They had an account, had done business with the bank for years, and could not get their attention for the PPP because they weren't big enough. So they called me to say, do you think City First can help? And actually, City First could help. The smaller banks, the community banks, the mission lenders, they know the community, they know these businesses, they can do a much better job of understanding what capital is needed, what the appropriate risk factors are. And that's why under Community Advantage, we brought those lenders into SBA's guarantee programs for the first time. That needs to be expanded. Procurement, Ron mentioned it, for example. That's another area where we know that works when Black folks have the opportunity to compete for government contracts. That's why under President Obama, Vice President Biden, there was a White House task force on procurement. The federal government had not been meeting its 23% procurement goal for many years prior. When we had that White House task force that was populated by deputy secretaries from every agency who had to come to the White House on a regular basis and report on what their agency was doing, let me tell you, it made a difference. Back to David's intentionality. When you focus on something, when you measure it, when you hold people accountable, it makes a difference. And I expect that kind of focus and setting of accountability among leadership will happen under the Biden-Harris administration, and that will inure to the benefit of our businesses.
No, and it you couldn't have said it any better. And with that, Ron, I'm going to come to you, and actually, David, this is actually a good question for some intersectionality between both of your organizations. But Ron, as the president of the U.S. Black Chambers, and David, obviously, of Black Economic Alliance, talk to us about how important it is for your organizations to be at the table. In many ways, we've talked about it in some ways, but I think, David, to your point around intentionality, it matters when organizations that represent our needs are at the table, so that when legislation is enacted, it comes down and it reflects our needs. So Ron, I know, once again, as an advocate and particularly in the Black business space, I know you know this very well. So, talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, and I appreciate Marie's comments, because that is so true. I can remember early on when we got the invitation to go and meet with the SBA administrator, and there were various communities there, from the Asian community, Hispanic community, Black community, and disabled veterans and women. Understand this, though, we each had unique needs and unique challenges. The challenges that we face are different from white women, or from the Asian community, or from the Hispanic community. But yet when they came out with solutions, they were broad brushed. It was all about MWBEs. And I say all the time, I'm not a minority, I'm Black. I'm not a woman, I'm a man. I'm not necessarily even a small business, but yet when they come up with the solutions, it's always about minority women entrepreneur business owners. Well, it's got to be more specific. And I agree, intentionality is something that we have been stressing extremely hard and harder under this administration, because there has been a lack of intentionality, understanding that each group, each community is being affected differently. And for those communities that are being affected the most, need to have the most intentionality in reference to making sure that they get through these tough times. And so I'm all in about saying, take away the diversity and inclusion programs, the minority programs, and be specific. Make it a race-based conversation. Let's take away this neutrality about all small businesses are the same. No, they're not. We have different challenges than my own neighbors as it relates to access to capital, as it relates to home ownership, and as it relates to contracting. So policy should and could be created that had the same intentionality about making improvements to the communities that were affected the most.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Ron. And, you know, there are unique needs of each community. I think, once again, 2020 has taught us a lot about the unique perspective and experience of Black Americans versus others. And this is not to say that this is to the exclusion of others. It's to say that you need to have people who are giving you insight from each community so you understand better. You also should have people in your cabinet and in your administration who represent these communities and have the proper contacts to these communities so that you're hearing, you know, good faith, good information that you're able to act on. And quite honestly, we've all seen, we've seen it this year and we've seen it in years over, people in power, in an administration, in Congress, at the state and local level, they are often in the position to pick winners and losers. I want people representing me like Kamala Harris and Joe Biden who want to be as inclusive as possible, figure out a way to use their limited resources and make sure that they are meeting the needs of different people, not saying, yes, we will help these folks, no, we will not help those folks. And so that's such an important piece of how you make smart decisions is having the right input from people like Marie, from people like Ron, even people like Carolyn, who can say, this is the experience of a small business owner, of a Black woman small business owner in Atlanta, and here's what I need at the federal level, at the state and local level, and even with the private sector. So it's so important to have the right people on the inside as well as on the outside advising the people who are making these decisions.
Yeah, that's such a really, really great point. We actually talked about that on Make It Happen Monday, and very particularly another individual mentioned particularly that it does help to have people who look like me sitting at the table, all right, and come from our communities and can advise on those things. You know, Carolyn, you know, I'm going to probably close out the conversation with this question, but I'm curious for you because you're a Black woman entrepreneur. You have a tech company, so there's a whole thing with that. What I really want to ask is, do you see the federal government being responsive kind of to this new age version of small business owners and entrepreneurs? You know, I'm not yet sure if we've caught up to where a lot of the tech startups are, in particular firms such as yourself. So, you know, what have you seen? And furthermore, what do you think the federal government can take into consideration for companies such as yours?
What I'll say is there's great opportunity for the government to be more responsive and to catch up to where tech innovations and entrepreneurs have gotten to in terms of what we're creating and what we actually need as business owners. I would say one thing that definitely continues to come up is access to direct funding. Even when we have stimulus dollars that become available, they very often stop at the service level rather than going directly to the entrepreneurs and small business owners themselves. So there's opportunities like that where the Biden-Harris administration will have the opportunity to really do things like this, have a forum where you can listen to business owners as well as other leaders in the community, hear about the pain points, and also hear about innovative solutions so that we can catch up and make sure that we're providing the support that's critical for the Black community and for Black business owners like myself. Yeah,
man, I really wish I can continue this conversation, and it is always a treat speaking with each of you in this moment. But it's super quick last thing, and this is a lightning round because I want to hear from all of you on this one. Biden and Kamala Harris win in 2 weeks. That's what we're claiming here. That's what we know and feel is going to happen. Marie, Ron, David, Carolyn, what do you want to see from day one for yourself and for the community that you care about, and particularly the businesses that you represent or advocate for? What do you want to see on day one?
Marie Johns be appointed as the SBA administrator.
Oh.
What I want to see is just the integrity restored, the respect for our government. I think we have been in such a, this has been a stain on the nation's history, among other big issues and challenges and places that we could have been so much better. But these past 4 years really stand out. So I'm just eager to see decency and integrity and a spirit of we're all one country return. And once we get that in place, and we'll go in with our list and our arguments for how we do build back better. So that's what I'm eager to see.
I'll say Black businesses and Black business owners are building their businesses faster than any other creators. And what I want to see is equal access, not just to capital, but to networks, to community, to technical assistance, to legal and accounting advice. All the things that we need to be successful need to be just as accessible as they are to mainstream America. And that's what I want to see from day one. And if not right away, the pathway to quickly get us there.
I'd love to see bold action. We talk a lot in government about, well, we'd like to do this, but this is what we're going to do. We just shot a $2 trillion bazooka earlier this year, the largest legislation to ever pass. We need more of it. We know the scale of the problem. Let's be bold in the asks that the new administration makes of Congress, but also in the way that we're talking about race and elevating the conversation around why we need to do this, how we got here, where we are now, what opportunity we have going forward. Joe Biden joined an event that BEA had 2 weeks ago, and I have not heard an articulation of the racial wealth divide and what we need to do to fix it like I heard that day. And I want to hear more of that from him. I want to see him standing next to Kamala Harris as she does it. And this administration is Black out loud in a way that we've never seen before, and that's never been socially acceptable before. So that's what I look forward to.
Ron, close us out, 'cause I know you're gonna come with the thunder.
Well, first off, I'll say my mentor was a guy by the name of Aubrey Stone. And one of the things that he always used to talk about was a Marshall Plan. And I didn't really understand it because I wasn't really old enough, I guess, to have been around when many of the wars were going on. And he explained that when we go into other countries and we take over other countries, that the first thing that America would do was to create a Marshall Plan to make sure that the citizens of that country had equity. And for the first time, and I'm 61 years old, I actually heard America put in place a Marshall Plan for Black people. Never been done before, at least that I'm aware of, never been discussed. First time it's coming under this administration from Biden and Harris. If we could just take a page out of that context and really implement what that is. And I'll end with this, and you've heard me say this before. Over the last 4.5 years, we done heard a whole lot about making America great again. And I'll say, as Black people, we want to see a great America as well. But in order for there to be a great America, there must be a great Black America. And in order for there to be a great Black America, there must be great Black businesses. And in order for there to be great Black businesses, we need great Black policy, and we need great Black leadership. And I think the folk on this call that are speaking, as well as the folk that are on this call that are listening, are all prepared to do what we need to do to make sure that America is great in the future for Black people as well.
Couldn't have said it better. This has been such a treat. You all are just amazing. The conversation has been great. It's been about intentionality. It's been about leadership. It's been about building back better through kind of being at the table, real leadership, and in being inclusive and innovative in these approaches. So once again, I want to thank you all as panelists this evening. This has been a tremendous conversation. At this time, we're going to actually pivot over to our Mobilize Main Street training. This is actually going to be really great. So please stay logged in and check us out. I'm going to pass it over to Jana Platt and Jim Doyle to give us our Mobilize Main Street training.
Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you to our panel for joining us. We are so lucky, and we are ready to put your call to action into work, especially through this toolkit. Happy to go straight into the training so we can have our Mobilize Main Street Action Toolkit up. We've heard from our special guests on why they're supporting the Get Out the Vote efforts for Joe Biden and Senator Harris. And I know each of us individually have been working on ourselves and as entrepreneurs and small business owners on why we are voting for this ticket. And as business leaders, you wear so many different hats. We want to make sure that we are giving you the tools so people can hear from your perspective directly. Now, with this Mobilize Action Toolkit that you'll have, it'll be in your email. There's useful information, there's key messaging, there's shareable digital content, there's sample materials for you to use, there's LTEs, there's emails to your staff and your professional networks. We want to make sure that it's right at your fingertips for you just to start emailing, going on any social media platform, having a printable sign, making sure that people know why you're supporting Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. We want to make sure you have all of those resources, but we also want to make sure that you have a resource to, reach out to your professional networks that might be in a nonpartisan way. I would love to hand it over to Jim Doyle of Business Board. Feel free to go to the next slide, and I'll pass it off to Jim.
Thank you very much, Jan. We appreciate it, and thank you to all the panelists. So what you heard in the discussion that led up to this are reasons why you should go out, or ways to arm you if you're going to go out and talk to your friends, your family, and your neighbors about why they should be supporting the Biden-Harris ticket. This is for you as a business owner. And if you're going to be talking to your employees, you just need to do it in a nonpartisan way. You can find this toolkit on our business website at businessfwd.org. That's businessfwd.org. If you have any questions, just email it to us at info@businessfwd.org, and we'll get right back to you. But if you download this toolkit from our website, you will, and you click on any link that's on these pages, it'll take you right where you want to go to a great organization or partner that can help you be a resource for your employees. Next slide, please. As a business owner, there are 5 things that you can do to help your employees. The first, obviously, is to help them register and prepare to vote. Second is to give them time to vote, whether it's on election day or during early voting. Third is to speak out about policies that encourage voting and make it easier. Fourth is to stand up for voters most likely to be silenced or suppressed. And the fifth is to prepare your employees for extended ballot counting and a delayed decision. And we're going to cover each of these things in the toolkit. Next slide, please. Getting started, it's pretty simple. Some of the biggest companies in America have been helping their employees register and vote for years, and they've shared what they learned. And there are 2 things that really stand out. The first is this is a problem about awareness and education. And so solving it doesn't take a lot of money, and it doesn't necessarily take a lot of time. If you help your employees know where to register, or how to register, where and how to vote, you can have a huge impact. The second thing these big companies would say is that CEO engagement is critical. It really makes an impact on your employees to have you as the business owner care about this and really step up. So there are 3 simple steps. The first is help your team find the basics on registration, education, when, where, and how to vote. Here we cite vote.org. It's a nonpartisan resource with all sorts of information. Very simple, just go to vote.org. Again, if you download this toolkit off our website and click on that, it'll take you right where you want to go. The second is if you're interested, you can find partners that can work with your employees. And what we recommend is that you find partners that fit your company's culture and your employees' point of view. What business owners who have a lot of younger employees have told us is that the employees react best to partners that focus on the arts or music. Go Vote is an organization where artists make art that encourages people to vote. Headcount.org works with musicians, record labels, and concert promoters. If you have a lot of young women on your team, you might want to reach out to Ignite, which is led by and for Gen Z women. There are all sorts of different organizations, and if you download the toolkit, you'll see links to a number of them. And then the third thing is simply to remember the do's and don'ts of this process. The do is encourage your employees to vote. The don't is encourage them to vote for a particular candidate. If you're going to help your employees register and vote, you have to be nonpartisan. Next slide. So how do you have the biggest impact? How do you get the biggest return for the investment you're making here? The first thing you can do is focus on early voting. Early voting is generally easier for workers with young children, a second job, those earning a degree at night. Chances are your employees do not know when early voting starts. So if you simply make sure they know that and you encourage them to go and you give them time to go, you can have a huge impact on whether they actually vote. Again, vote.org has got all the information they're going to need. Next slide. We also encourage you to help those who need it most. Your younger voters, your younger workers are 20% less likely than the national average to vote. And as we all know, people of color are more likely to face obstacles to voting. There are a number of organizations in the red box to the right that can help. They're just terrific, from Rock the Vote to the Coalition on Black Civic Participation, Vote Latino. Next Gen America is an organization that works with younger voters who care about climate. There are all sorts of partners, and again, we encourage you to work with them. The next slide. We encourage you to speak out, and I want to be serious about this because there are a lot of small business leaders who have told us that they worry that helping their employees vote might be perceived as being political. And a few years ago, that may have actually been the case, but things have changed quite a bit in the last few years. 8 out of 10 of your customers believe companies should take action. 8 out of 10 of your customers would prefer to buy from companies that support democracy. And if you look at surveys of employees, it's the same result. 8 out of 10 employees would prefer to work for a company that is taking some kind of stand. We've turned a corner here where maybe a few years ago, you might have faced a bit of brand risk by getting involved in helping your employees vote. Now you face a brand risk if you do nothing, and that's significant. Now, if you're gonna try to step up and speak out, we encourage you to partner with an organization that will help you do that. And frankly, there's safety in numbers. 2 organizations on the box on the right, electionday.org and Time to Vote, are supported by 800-900 companies across the country each, including some of the biggest, most respected companies in America. So if you partner with electionday.org or Time to Vote, you're partnering with a big organization that's doing great work, and it's going to be a lot less political. So again, speak out. It'll be good for your team. Next slide. If you're looking to really step up, we strongly encourage you to become a poll worker or a poll watcher. And let's talk about the difference. Poll workers are trained by local election boards to identify and manage problems at polling places. They help count the votes. Now, in a typical year, 6 out of 10 workers at the polls are 60 years old or older. And with COVID-19, a lot of those seniors are going to have to stay home to stay safe. So we need to replace those senior citizens with younger Americans who can go and do the work. And if you're interested in doing this, we encourage you to go to Power the Polls. It's an amazing organization that can tell you everything you need to know. You can also encourage your employees to be poll workers as well. And again, Power the Polls, it's a nonpartisan organization, and these jobs in most counties pay. A different job is poll watchers, and these are recruited by the political parties to protect people casting their vote. They work with election officials to address problems at the polls, particularly voter intimidation. Again, very important for people to do, and given COVID-19, important for younger people in particular to step up. Because this is a nonpartisan resource, if you click on the links on this trade group, this toolkit, you will find links to Republican poll watching opportunities, Democratic poll watching opportunities, and third-party poll watching opportunities. You need to make those available to your employees. Next slide. When you're talking to your employees, you're probably going to get a lot of questions on mail-in voting and voter fraud in general. And we think it's important for you to have the facts. First, just on mail-in voting, it's quite common. For the last two elections, 2016 and 2018, 1 in 4 Americans have voted by mail. 28 states already encourage vote by mail without asking for a reason. In fact, since we produced this slide, the number has actually gone up. It's enjoyed bipartisan support for years. President Trump and Republicans in Congress are questioning mail-in voting, and it's totally disproven by the historic record. 5 states in America vote exclusively by mail. Number 1, they have a higher turnout rate. Number 2, they have lower cost of administering elections. And number 3, they have incredibly low voter fraud, 0.001%. In 2016, these 5 states reported 112 cases of potential fraud out of 11 million ballots. I want to just focus on this 0.001% for a moment, because it's hard really to appreciate how small that number is and how much the other side is exaggerating how big voter fraud is. So there are organizations out there trying to recruit people to disrupt polling places. And they say that between 3 and 5% of all votes cast are fraudulent. It's just totally unsupported by historical record, totally unsupported by audits conducted by law enforcement. Studies done by secretaries of state and law enforcement have again found 0.001. So the difference between 5% and 0.001% is a factor of 5,000. So they're grossly exaggerating what's going on, and you need to be able to step up and speak out against it. Another thing worth pointing out, although we're getting close to the point where vote by mail might be a little bit riskier, is that if you vote by mail, the risk of error is substantially less than if you vote in person. What ends up happening on election day sometimes is often is that people show up at the wrong polling place, and they've waited in the line, and they get to the front of the line, and they're not able to vote because they've gone to the wrong place, and that doesn't happen when you vote by mail. So we're going to be hearing a lot about voter fraud in the next few weeks. It's really important for you to understand 2 numbers. 5% is the number that the other side is claiming is happening. 0.001% is the number that secretaries of state and law enforcement who've actually investigated voter fraud have found. And the difference is a factor of 5,000. Next slide. The last thing we recommend is that you prepare your employees for election week, not election night. Some states will accept ballots postmarked on election day, which means vote totals for those states could take more than a week. On election night, some states will count their mail-in ballots first, some will count them last. Because Democrats appear to be voting by mail in a greater percentage, this could affect early vote totals one way or the other, but it will not affect the final result. What we encourage you to do is set expectations with your employees early so that they know to be patient. You can help them manage the anxiety from this election. It may end early, it may not, but we just need to help our employees, particularly our younger employees, understand that this is to be expected. Next slide. So again, you can find this toolkit in Spanish and in English. We have state-specific reports available for you, all at businessfwd.org. We encourage you to visit the website, download it. If you've attended this on the Zoom, you'll get an email with a link to the toolkit sent to you right after this. But if you're participating through Facebook Live or social media in some other way, we encourage you to go to businessfwd.org to download it. Thank you very much for your time.
And thank you so much, Jim, for that. This is critical and immensely helpful. And so I encourage you all to go and check this out. we're all we got, and we need each other in this moment. So I really, really encourage you. And so, look, we are just a couple of days away from one of the most historic elections, in my opinion, in our lifetime. And so here's two things, and actually a couple things that I want to leave with you. Look, get a plan. There are many places right now that are actually already open for early voting and absentee ballot voting. Get that in. As a matter of fact, my wife and I today were able to go mail in ours and put it directly into a ballot box. So please take some with you, someone with you, and do that. We also want to encourage you because, once again, it's about reaching networks that we may not be tapped into. So I encourage you all to sign up for a Get Out the Vote shift. You can go to iwillvote.com. Once again, iwillvote.com will allow for you to find out information on your kind of local situation and sign up for some of the shift work that's going on. You can sign up for a phone bank. You can actually work the polls and do a number of things to, once again, get out this vote. I also want to encourage you to text BIZ, that's biz, BIZ to 30330. Once again, these are some real actionable ways that you can get yourself involved, and we really encourage you to do so. And with that, this has been a Mobilize Main Street training. I want to thank Rhett Buttle. I want to thank Trey Baker. I want to thank all of our panelists this evening who gave some great nuggets of truth and nuggets of insights and real strategy on this call. And then a special thanks to Jana and Jim. And once again, this is Mobilize Main Street. And here's to a Super Tuesday and for winning this thing. We're going to bring home this win for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. Have a good night.
Now, child, and don't cry. Your folks might understand you by and by. Just move on up toward your destination.